homeless veteran kneels on a cold clinic floor, hands trembling against matted fur, whispering words he hasn't spoken in years. On the table beside him lies a dog named Sergeant, the only family he has left, and the vet is reaching for a syringe. This is the moment Marcus Cole has to say goodbye. They'd survived everything together. Freezing nights, hunger, the kind of loneliness that hollows you out from the inside. But now Sergeant lies still, barely breathing. The vet says his organs are failing. There's nothing left to do. Marcus presses his forehead against Sergeant's and whispers, "I'm sorry, boy. I'm so sorry." The vet reaches for the syringe, but before she can end Sergeant's life, someone in the back room calls out, and everything changes. But to understand why this moment mattered so much, you need to know who Marcus Cole was before his whole life came undone. Marcus enlisted at 19. He believed in something bigger than himself: duty, honor, brotherhood. He served 2 tours overseas, earned medals he never talked about, and watched friends die in places most people couldn't find on a map. When the Army finally sent him home, everyone said he was one of the lucky ones. He didn't feel lucky. How many veterans do you think are out there right now feeling the exact same way? The nightmares started within weeks. Loud noises sent him diving for cover. He couldn't sleep without seeing the faces of men who never made it back. His wife tried to reach him, but Marcus had built walls too high for anyone to climb. Within a year, the marriage collapsed. Within 2, he lost his job. Too many missed shifts, too many outbursts he couldn't explain. The Army called it an honorable discharge. It felt like abandonment. The VA put him on a waiting list. His family stopped calling. Friends drifted away. And one cold November night, Marcus found himself standing under a highway overpass with a duffel bag and nowhere left to go. He stayed there for 3 years. 3 years of hunger, invisibility, and wondering if anyone would notice if he simply disappeared. Marcus Cole had stopped believing that help would ever come. He had stopped believing in anything at all. But the world wasn't done with him yet. It was a Tuesday morning when everything changed. Marcus was digging through a dumpster behind a fast food restaurant, looking for something to eat, when he heard it, a faint whimper coming from beneath a pile of trash bags. He almost walked away. He had enough problems of his own. But something made him stop. He pushed aside the garbage and found a dog, ribs showing through matted fur, one ear torn and bloody, eyes barely open. The animal was starving, dehydrated, and too weak to stand. Someone had thrown him away like he was nothing. Marcus knew the feeling. He didn't have money for a vet. He barely had money for himself, but he couldn't leave that dog to die. So he wrapped him in his only jacket, carried him back to the overpass, and spent the next 3 days nursing him back to life. He shared his food, cleaned the wounds with bottled water, and talked to him, really talked, for the first time in years. If the dog died, Marcus knew he'd have nothing left to lose. The dog pulled through. Against all odds, he fought his way back. Marcus named him Sergeant. It seemed right. The dog had a fighter's spirit, scrappy, stubborn, refusing to give up even when he had every reason to quit. And from the moment Sergeant could stand on his own, he never left Marcus's side. Not once. For the first time in years, Marcus had a reason to wake up in the morning. But he didn't know yet just how much Sergeant would give back. Have you ever had an animal find you at exactly the right moment in your life? Tell me in the comments. Life under the overpass was hard, but with Sargent, it became something Marcus could almost call bearable. On the coldest nights, when the wind cut through the concrete like a blade, Sargent would curl up against Marcus's chest, sharing whatever warmth they had between them. Marcus would wrap his arms around that bony frame and feel, for the first time in years, like he wasn't completely alone in the world. Sargent became his protector, too. One night, two men crept toward Marcus while he slept, looking to take whatever little he had. But before they got close, Sargent was on his feet, teeth bared, growling low and fierce. The men backed off fast. They didn't come back. Word spread among the other people living on the streets. Don't mess with the veteran and his dog. But it wasn't just protection. It was presence. Marcus talked to Sargent about things he'd never told another soul. About the war. About the friends he lost. About the man he used to be. Sargent never interrupted. Never judged. He just listened. His head resting on Marcus's leg. Eyes steady and patient. For Marcus, that was enough. No government agency came looking for him. No old friends reached out. Everyone else had given up on Marcus. Sargent never did. And for a while, that was enough. It started slowly. One morning, Sargent didn't finish his food. Marcus didn't think much of it. Dogs skip meals sometimes. But the next day, he didn't eat at all. And the day after that, he barely lifted his head. Something was wrong. Within a week, Sargent could hardly walk. His eyes, once bright and alert, had gone dull. He stopped wagging his tail. He stopped responding when Marcus called his name. And then one afternoon, without warning, he collapsed on the concrete and didn't get back up. Marcus felt his whole world tilt. He scooped Sargent into his arms and started walking, 3 miles across town to the only free veterinary clinic he knew about. His legs burned, his arms shook, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. When he pushed through the clinic doors, the waiting room went quiet. People stared at the homeless man covered in dirt, cradling a limp dog against his chest. Marcus didn't care. He begged them to help. The vet examined Sargent for what felt like hours. She ran tests, checked vitals, studied the results with a face that told Marcus everything before she said a word. Suspected organ failure. Irreversible. The kindest thing, she said, would be to let him go. Marcus stood there, unable to speak. He had survived war. He had survived the streets. He had survived things that would have broken most people. But losing Sargent? He wasn't sure he could survive that. What would you do if a vet told you it was time to say goodbye? The vet gave Marcus a few minutes alone. He knelt beside the exam table and placed his hand on Sargent's side, feeling the shallow rise and fall of his breathing. For a long moment, Marcus couldn't speak. The words caught somewhere deep in his chest, tangled up with years of silence and grief he'd never let himself feel. Then, quietly, he began to talk. He told Sargent he was sorry. Sorry he couldn't give him a real home, a warm bed, a better life. He thanked him for the cold nights made bearable, for the protection, for the companionship that pulled him back from the edge more times than he could count. He said things out loud he hadn't spoken since before the war, words about love, about loss, about how much it meant to not be alone. Sargent, barely conscious, lifted his head one last time. With whatever strength he had left, he pressed his muzzle into Marcus's chest, the same way he always did. One final gesture of comfort, not for himself, but for the man who had saved him. Marcus broke. Tears streamed down his face as he held that dog close, whispering goodbye. The vet returned. She prepared the syringe, her movements gentle and practiced. Marcus kept his hand on Sergeant's fur, unwilling to let go, knowing these were the last seconds they'd have together. The needle was ready. The goodbye was complete. And then, a voice called out from the back room. "Wait! Stop!" The vet froze, syringe in hand. A technician stood in the doorway, holding an X-ray up to the light, her brow furrowed. "You need to see this." The vet set the needle down and crossed the room. She studied the image for a long moment, tilting her head, squinting at something near Sergeant's stomach. Her expression shifted. First confusion, then disbelief, then something Marcus hadn't seen since he walked through those doors. Hope. "This isn't organ failure," she said slowly, almost to herself. She turned to Marcus. "There's something lodged in his stomach. It looks like a plastic bottle cap." Marcus blinked. He didn't understand. The vet explained, "Sergeant must have swallowed it weeks ago, maybe scavenging for food. The obstruction had been slowly blocking his digestive system, mimicking the symptoms of organ shutdown. But his organs weren't failing. They were fighting against something that didn't belong there. If we can remove it," she said, "he has a chance. A real chance." Marcus felt his legs nearly give out beneath him. Seconds ago he was saying goodbye. Now the vet was telling him Sergeant could live. But there was a problem. This clinic wasn't equipped for surgery. They didn't have the tools, the staff, or the sterile environment needed to operate. If Sergeant was going to survive, they had to find an animal hospital willing to take him, and they had to do it fast. Every minute mattered. Sergeant was fading. The clock was ticking. And Marcus had no idea how he was going to make this happen. Did you see that twist coming? Be honest. The vet made call after call. Most places said no. Too busy, too expensive, not equipped to handle an emergency case with no guarantee of payment. Marcus stood in the corner, holding Sergeant, watching hope slip away with every shake of her head. Then one hospital said yes. A small animal surgical center across town agreed to operate pro bono. They'd heard the story. The homeless veteran, the dying dog, the last-minute discovery, and they wanted to help. A volunteer from the clinic, a woman named Elena, offered to drive them. Marcus climbed into the back seat, Sergeant cradled in his lap, and didn't say a word the entire ride. He just held on. The surgery took 2 hours. Marcus sat in the waiting room, still covered in dirt, still wearing the same clothes he'd worn for weeks. People glanced at him, then looked away. He didn't notice. His mind was somewhere else, under the overpass, remembering every moment with Sergeant. The night they met. The cold they survived together. The growl that kept him safe. Have you ever waited for news that could change everything, knowing there was nothing you could do but hope? Elena sat beside him quietly. At some point, she took out her phone and started recording, not intrusively, just capturing the raw, unfiltered truth of a man waiting to learn if his best friend would live or die. Finally, the surgeon emerged. "He made it," she said. "He's going to be okay." Marcus didn't respond at first. He just sat there, frozen. Then his shoulders began to shake. Tears he'd been holding back for years, since the war, since losing everything, finally broke free. The surgery was over, but the story wasn't. 2 days later, Marcus walked into the recovery room. Sargent was lying on a soft blanket, still groggy from the medication, a small bandage on his belly. But the moment he heard Marcus's footsteps, his ears perked up. His tail began to wag, slowly at first, then faster. And when Marcus knelt beside him, Sargent lifted his head and pressed it into his chest, just like he always did. Marcus wrapped his arms around that dog and held him like he'd never let go. Elena was there. She filmed the reunion, just a few seconds of raw, unscripted emotion, and posted it online that night. She didn't expect much. Maybe a few shares, a handful of kind comments. Within 48 hours, the video had 2 million views. Donations poured in from strangers across the country. Job offers arrived. A veterans organization reached out, offering Marcus housing, counseling, and a path back to the life he thought he'd lost forever. 3 weeks later, Marcus Cole moved into a small apartment on the east side of the city. It wasn't much, just 1 bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and a window that let in the morning sun. But it was his. And there, on a real bed for the first time in years, Sargent curled up beside him, warm, safe, and alive. The world had forgotten Marcus Cole, but Sargent hadn't. And because of one scrappy, battle-scarred mutt, the world remembered him again. Where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel.